Ah, sunny California, a beautiful land named after a mythical Greek island. Its nickname is the Golden State, a cornucopia that could feed most nations, majestic beaches that are recognizable the whole world over, and titanic trees that have stood since the reign of Julius Caesar. All of these wonders can be seen and experienced by spending a day driving through this land of nuts and fruits. California isn't just pretty though, it's also pretty darn rich. In 2017, California, with a population of just 40 million, had a GDP of almost $3 trillion. That's a couple of $100 million larger than the GDP of India, a country with 1.3 billion inhabitants. California's real per capita GDP is almost $69,000, whereas India's is less than $2,000. This vast wealth makes California one of the wealthiest places in the world. It's the sixth largest economy, which is about the size of France's, despite having 26 million fewer people. A free society populated by some of the wealthiest people in human history, built upon an Eden-esque landscape. What a place to be! However, you may have noticed that this sounds too good to be true, and if you didn't, you may be surprised to hear news like this that comes out of the state every few years.
California's budget deficit is back, Governor Jerry Brown says. LA Times 2017. Less than 4 years after declaring California's budget balanced for the foreseeable future, Governor Jerry Brown on Tuesday said the state is projected to run a $1.6 billion deficit by next summer. Stockton, California, to become largest city to declare bankruptcy. CBS 2012.
Now this news is a couple of years old, and actually California runs a pretty healthy surplus at the time of this writing, but that's not what's important here. Even if the state's finances are fine now, they won't be for long. California cycles through fiscal crises semi-regularly. So how can it be that in a state with high taxes, taxing some of the wealthiest people in the world, it is so often struggling to pay its bills? Other questions are, well, is there a solution, and how does this affect the daily life of Californians? Well, today we're going to answer all of these questions, but before we do, let's take a look back at the history.
California's financial fault lines.
So where do we start when dealing with such a big problem? Well, let's try taxes and spending. California spends a lot of money, often more than it takes in, which is what this video is about, obviously. But how much money is that? The 2019 to 2020 state budget was a whopping $209 billion, which is bigger than the entire GDP of Greece. That's not all. This is even high for California standards because they won't stop spending more and more money. The 2008 to 2009 budget was $144 billion, also large, but still $50 billion cheaper. However, back then, this was also high for California, and if you went all the way back to 1990, the budget was, after factoring in inflation, $101 billion in 2019 money. That's right, the state of California's budget has doubled in real terms over the last 30 years. So, where does the money go? Well, it goes a lot of places. For example, the state has been trying to build an $80 billion high-speed rail network from LA through the Central Valley, though the price keeps increasing. A more wholesome example is that from 2018 to 2019, California spent almost $5 billion on health and human services, $3.8 billion of which went to the Department of Child Services, which is a state program to get publicly assisted healthcare for sick children, and just under $200 million went to the Department of Aging, which provides welfare services for the elderly. Meanwhile, Texas, a state with just 10 million fewer people, spent $0 on such things, with the only real funding on health issues going to hospitals and to the elderly for pensions, both of which are things that California does on a larger scale. Now, I don't know about you, but I know that a lot of people would rather pay a Texas tax rate rather than a California tax rate. However, isn't tax money going to help sick children and elderly people exactly the kind of stuff that taxes are intended for? So, I mean, what's the problem here? The problem is that the state has struggled to keep up revenue to pay for these services. Now, this might sound bad. Normally, when we think of regular financial crises, we think of Greece or Argentina, but California is the golden state. So let's say you're a Californian. Maybe you work as a coder for Google, or an economist for Monsanto, or an oil refinery worker for Chevron. So what does it matter to you if the local government owes a few $billion? Well, probably not a whole lot. In fact, it would be surprising if half the citizens of, well, anywhere really knew the specifics about their local government spending habits. The difference between California and those two economic quagmires is that California actually has business, world-class universities, a thriving agricultural industry, and Hollywood, plus a booming culture of venture capitalism. In other words, their economy is extremely diversified. This all means that California can withstand the occasional shortcoming because it's just that good. So, again, where's the problem? Well, let's start with taxes. We know the government started spending money like crazy, almost always for things like welfare, pensions, and eternally cramped prisons, and they managed to pay for enough of it to keep going. So, where's the money coming from? Well, of course, it all comes from taxes, and California has some really high taxes. For example, California has the highest maximum income tax rate of any state, over 13%. For comparison, the state with the next highest tax rate is Hawaii, with 11%. Moreover, the next two most populous states, Texas and Florida, have no income tax whatsoever, along with 5 other states. It's not just income taxes either. High property taxes, high capital gains taxes, and high corporate tax all factor in. It doesn't have a very high sales tax, especially by European standards, but that one's still the 10th highest in the union. Now that you know where that $200 billion is coming from, we still go back to, okay, so with some of the highest taxes on the global uber wealthy and corporations, how is it that they're still struggling with funding? Well, the issue is that the high taxes, corporate income, property, and capital gains, of which California is highly dependent, all affect the rich the most. It's actually a proper progressive tax system. In fact, in 2004, it was estimated that the wealthiest 3% of revenue made up 60% of tax revenue from income tax.
Damn.
However, this comes with a major issue. You see, when the national and global economy is doing well, like now, the state rakes in tons of tax money from all the megacorps and venture capitalists and things like that. But when things go poorly, when the stock market goes down, investments are risky and companies have lower returns, and this means the revenue plummets faster than a Hong Kong rights activist under suspicious circumstances. Other high-tax societies don't really have this issue of instability to the same level as California. Sweden, which also has remarkably high taxes, is less prone to fluctuation. Why? Because they have a more diversified tax system. As an example, they do have a 25% sales tax. This is 3 times higher than California's. Such tax policies are considered regressive because both rich and poor pay the same. But they do have an advantage. Consumption fluctuates much more than investments. After all, no matter how good or bad the stock market does, you tend to go grocery shopping every week and on holidays buy lots of stuff. So the sales tax collection is much more reliable. So aside from just being really high, California's taxes fluctuate a lot year after year. So does it pay off? Is this very progressive tax system in which the rich pay higher dues worth it, even if it fluctuates? Has the titanic welfare state it supports succeeded? Is California a proper, progressive, economically egalitarian society? Is it really more equal? Well, not really.
The homeless nation.
California is not just unequal, it's incredibly unequal. California has the 4th highest income equality of the 50 states, which is almost as bad as Louisiana at number 3. 7 of America's 15 most unequal cities call the Golden State home, and it's not getting any better. Subsequently, we get news like this.
LA's homelessness surged 75% in 6 years. The number of those living in the streets and shelters of the city of Los Angeles and most of the county surged 75% to roughly 55,000 from about 32,000 in the last 6 years.
Now, inequality alone didn't cause this. Urban populations have continued to grow, and economic peculiarities, like those mentioned in another video we did about the case of Airbnb, have led to a disastrously high cost of living in the state, with high housing costs being a major contributor. In March 2019, the national median rent for a two-bedroom apartment was $1,175. In Los Angeles, it's $1,752. San Diego's $2,030. San Francisco, $3,165. But it doesn't stop there. California also has other high costs, like above-average food prices and the highest transportation costs in the country. Now, throw on those notoriously high taxes. Calling the system strained is a bit of an understatement. A cheap labor force imported from Latin America has helped keep wages down, and the tech bourgeoisie pushing up prices has only contributed further to the growing inequality. From 1980 to 2015, inflation-adjusted wages rose 18% for the bottom 10% of the workforce, whereas the top 5% experienced a wage increase of 122%. This means someone who made $15,000 a year in 1980 would now make $17,700, whereas someone who made $100,000 would now make $222,000. Now throw in some other situational factors like nice weather attracting the homeless from less hospitable states and strict zoning laws keeping new housing from being built, plus a national mental health crisis, and you have the recipe to develop parallel societies. One made up of impoverished fentanyl zombies living in tent communes, and the other the world's elite. So what's being done about all of this? Well, nothing. I mean, really, nothing. The response from local governments and their democratic supermajorities has been deafeningly silent. Many local city governments, Oakland for instance, offer short-term housing for some homeless people who essentially win the lottery to get it, but it only lasts 6 months and then they're back on the street. Essentially, they just kick the homeless over to the next town, creating cyclical waves of homeless hordes passing through each region like a dog chasing its own tail. In frosty New York, about 95% of transients receive sheltering. In Seattle, it's almost 60%. San Francisco is under 40%, and San Luis Obispo is below 20%. So where is all that tax money going instead of sheltering the poor? Well, in one example, in 2016, the city of LA sent out their police, who are of course funded by taxpayer money, to confiscate tiny shelters donated to the homeless by a private charity. Yes, really, they pay police to steal donated shelters from the homeless and probably throw them in an incinerator somewhere. Meanwhile, the state needs about 3 million new dwellings to cover demand. And what's the outcome of all of this? Well, it's not so sunny.
From California dreamin' to California night terrors.
California might still be the Golden State, but it's lost its glitter. The fluctuating budgets, high inequality, and high costs of living are straining Californian society in unexpected ways. Just look at this.
Official lies, bubonic plague, and California's homeless challenge. Forbes 2019. The trash, used needles, and human waste littering California's cities have led to increased numbers of rats and, along with them, fleas and deadly diseases. There were 13 reported cases of typhus in California in 2008, spiking to 167 in 2018, while hepatitis A, tuberculosis, and staph has been spreading aggressively in San Francisco and other California cities.
Yes, really, the plague is actually back. The more things change, the more they stay the same. This issue of mass homelessness is leading to sanitation issues as camps spring up under bridges and in parks with no regulation and no sanitation infrastructure. Now throw in some natural pests and a drug epidemic, you've got a pandemic in the making. As you can imagine, Californians aren't the happiest. In fact, many are very, very angry at society, and the seeds of radicalism are watered with misery. This is a complicated issue, probably worth its own video, but here are just some of the headlines so you can get an idea.
21 arrested as hundreds of Trump supporters and counter-protesters clash at Berkeley rally. LA Times, 2017. Protesters to face assault trial and bloody 2016 Capitol riot that left 10 injured. The Sacramento Bee, 2019.
That's right, California, the state known for hippies and skating, is getting increasingly polarized. Now people are angry with the state of things. They see needles on the streets and struggle to pay the bills. Meanwhile, some rich venture capitalists live in a big house half a block away. So not only are there many homeless on the streets, but also anarchists who terrorize businesses and riots. Berkeley and San Francisco, once the centers of American liberalism, are becoming breeding grounds for radicalism. So I've painted a pretty dour picture, right? Well, now throw in some environmental issues issues that we don't have time for, like high urban pollution, out-of-control wildfires, and invasive species, and, well, what do you think most people are doing? If you answered building a giant gold statue of Arnold Schwarzenegger, you answered wrong. If you said getting out of there fast, you answered right. In 2018, almost 700 Californians left California. Yep, people are really leaving in droves for other states like Idaho, Texas, Colorado, Oklahoma, and Nevada, where they have lower costs of living, lower taxes, and stronger wage growth. Yes, congratulations. You now live in a timeline where people are leaving California to go to Oklahoma. But wait, you say, California's population is increasing, Simon. What's all that about? Well, you see, whereas 690,000 Californians left, 500,000 people moved in from other states. But that's still a net 190,000 loss. So how are there more people in California in 2019 than 2015? Well, it's international immigration rather than internal migration. You see, though there was a net loss of 190,000 Americans leaving California every day, if not hour, the state receives thousands of immigrants from places like Mexico, Nigeria, Guatemala, the Philippines, and Eastern Europe, so many that it offsets the locals leaving, and so the population continues to increase. Despite the state's problems, it's still preferable to Guatemala, and we can't say we're too surprised there. So now I'll turn it over to you. What do you think will happen next? Is this just a phase in the state's young history? Will the state stabilize its budget and spend its surplus responsibly? So I really hope you found that video interesting. Please don't forget to visit our friends from reconsidermedia.com, the podcast that provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. Also, we publish brand new videos every week, so subscribe to VisualPolitik and hit that bell button so you won't miss a thing. Also, if you liked this video, please do give us a thumbs up. It's free, and as always, I'll see you next time.
If you want to learn more about politics and world affairs and hear some more of my lovely voice, come check out the Reconsider podcast, where we don't do the thinking for you. Find Reconsider at www.reconsidermedia.com or on Apple or Google Play or your favorite podcatcher.